with it. So like I say, I'm going to focus the talk on natural process restoration. It could be much wider. We could go in a lot of different directions with this, but focusing on where our work and some of EcoStewardess's work, not just where we work together, but just generally as a business overlap, feels like a really nice opportunity. So we are the Belmont estate. Some of you may have heard of us. I'm sure many of you haven't. We are a business focused on values. So those values born maybe 10 years ago when we first started and have become distilled over time. Our values of nature connection, of nature recovery and climate action and impact, as well as food production, as well as shared experience. But ultimately, we're pretty focused on a mission to reconnect people with nature, reconnect people with food and where it comes from, and reconnect people with each other. There's a kind of ultimate belief within our business that some of the big problems that we face in terms of the climate crisis and the nature collapse can be traced back to our fundamental disconnection from nature. So we're always looking for opportunities to rebuild that connection and benefit from that connection in as many ways as we can. We were originally Belmont, so Belmont Estate is an estate just outside of Bristol, but over the last 10 years, as our scale of our vision and our impact has grown, we're now across multiple sites. So we've got a couple of sites in the southwest and a big site in Scotland, which I'll tell you a bit more about as we go.
I think we might have lost Gil.
I think we've lost Gil. I was just thinking that. I think Gil's dropped out there.
He is back.
There you are.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
You didn't miss anything good. Take it from me. Right, I'll just reshare and pick up where I left off. Bear with me 1 sec. Okay. So, with apologies, everything we do, we hope, falls under one of three pillars. Those three pillars you can see in front of you are climate mitigation, nature restoration, and community building. And when our work is most powerful, it's attending to all three at once. And that is an attempt to acknowledge that actually nearly all of the problems that we face or opportunities that we're confronted with are connected, intertwined, interrelated. So if you consider the climate crisis in isolation without looking at the role that nature plays within that landscape and within that particular crisis, then you've really misunderstood it, and vice versa. And that cultural piece, that societal piece, goes right through the heart of it too. So this is some of the work that we're actually up to now, some of the work that we have got on with in the past and we find ourselves engaged in now. So on the climate front, we're restoring peatlands in across our Scottish estates. We're creating woodlands through a range of methods, but focusing on natural processes, so natural regeneration. But even with natural regeneration, this is a recurring theme. Even with natural processes, we're finding ourselves having to kickstart, having to kind of crank the engine a bit. And so we're very willing to do some conventional tree planting, maybe as a seed source for natural regeneration. That's a theme we'll come back to. The idea that natural processes might be zero intervention is a reality that I've had to come to re-understand. And so we're increasingly involved in a whole range of nature-based projects across the UK and further afield too. On the nature front, so like I say, focusing on those natural processes, but we're also farming regeneratively. I'll talk a bit about that as we go through, because essentially we're choosing our approach on as a response to the opportunities or constraints of the landscape that we find ourselves managing. Some landscapes really lend themselves to open-ended nature restoration. Other landscapes, through various either opportunities or restrictions, lend themselves to something more like regenerative farming. but we're rewilding. That's a word I haven't used yet, but very proud of. So we're rewilding landscapes. We are and have remeandered rivers. We're creating woodlands, and we will be introducing some of the missing pieces of the jigsaw as we go. So lost wildlife and species reintroductions. Rewilding as a mission is like doing a jigsaw, but knowing you haven't got all the pieces before you even start. And so we have to acknowledge we can't finish the jigsaw, but finding as many pieces as you can and putting them in is the mission. And hopefully we'll come up with a nice picture by the end of it. But there are certain pieces of the jigsaw that we just know in advance are missing and will always be missing. Doesn't mean we're not committed to trying. And then running through the heart of it, we've got community. So we're already educating thousands of children, all for free. I loitered or smirked over the word educate because there's that's an evolving ambition and mission. So actually what I should be saying is we are reconnecting thousands of children to nature for free. There is education and learning that happens, and it's really powerful, but actually the core mission is to reconnect children and people with nature. So we've been creating communities through volunteering opportunities. I'll build that out as we go. We work really hard to bring people together, to reconnect them with nature and with each other and with food through engaging perhaps dining events or eating together or social events, because this should be fun wherever it can be. And almost accidentally as we go, we're creating local employment. And what we find, especially as we look at some of these as the opportunity that we're exploring in Scotland, is that we're redefining skill sets and upskilling people for an emerging market that will be prevalent in the years to come. So we hope giving people a resilient, forward-looking skill set. So apologies for this page. So it would be nice to do the whole thing without necessarily loitering on the dire situation that we're having to confront, but it would be disingenuous to ignore it. The context for our work is that the UK is one of the most nature depleted countries on the planet. So you can see some of the figures when I was writing this slide. It could have gone on forever, but there is a massive and fundamental nature collapse which is happening on our watch within our lifetimes. It's happened within my lifetime. Half of our biodiversity, having disappeared since the 70s, has happened, give or take, within my lifetime. And it's everywhere you look. So from sky, ocean, soil, you can see species decline, habitat decline in every direction. And so there's an urgent need to do something about it. The government has made several pledges, several big policy announcements, which might include the pledge to end nature decline by 2030, or this ambition for 30% of nature to be preserved by 2030. And BNG is something we'll talk about later, which is a pretty powerful statement of policy intent. But ultimately, the first thing we need to do is to understand the situation we're in and try and understand some of the drivers. So for the UK, just shy of 70%, actually, let's focus on England, just shy of 70% of the land coverage in England is under agriculture. So we've got to look really carefully at the role that agriculture has played and is playing in the situation we currently find ourselves in. Agriculture, since the end of the Second World War especially, has been brutally simplifying ecosystems. A farm is an ecosystem, just a very simplified one. So a dairy farm, for example, has a very narrow range of inputs and a very narrow range of outputs. It's missing the glorious, almost impossible complexity of the natural world. And if you think about agriculture kind of through time, over the last 2,000 years, it hasn't been exerting this catastrophic negative impact that whole time. That's really come about since the end of the Second World War. Farms through time, really, if you imagine a farm historically, it would have had perhaps some woodland so that you could have a fire and you could heat your home. It would have had some grain so that you could make some bread and some food. It would have had species-rich meadow so that you could graze your grazing animals, and you would have kept some of nearly every animal. There's some cattle and some pigs and some sheep and some fowl, and the whole farm would have been run on horse or pony power. and so they would all need somewhere to drink, and so it had ponds and scrapes and rivers and streams so they could drink, and all of this would have existed in one place in a bit of a mess. And what I've really described there is that missing complexity of the natural world. The reason that agriculture didn't exert such harm, such damage for so long, is that it accidentally represented what came before for the longest time. Since the end of the Second World War, there's been an intensification and a specialization of agriculture, and that's why we've got, or one of the reasons that we've got such massive impacts on nature within our lifetime. So what feels really important is to recognize the where we're at now in order to understand what we can do to get ourselves out of it. So let me just find my mouse. So one of the reasons we need to recognize how to get ourselves out of it is not just that it's emotionally arresting and challenging. It's because we are fundamentally dependent on the natural world, on natural processes. So we must scale our ambition for impact and to seek out opportunities to make a difference now. And now is a time to be bold, because if you think about on the last page, the pledge to make by 2030 to stop nature decline, that's 6 years away, and any sort of nature recovery takes a bit of time to get going, takes a bit of time to plan, takes a bit of time to approve, takes a bit of time to fund, and then takes a bit of time to deliver. So the timeframes that we're talking about are terrifyingly short, and natural processes underpin every aspect of our existence. So from our food production is just a natural process. It's just the ripening of an ovary or a fruit body. It's just the swelling of a root node for a potato, or insect pollination, or just when you really look into it, every element of our life is really dependent on functioning, healthy natural processes. So that is clean air, it's flood mitigation, it's our weather cycles, it's the provision of medicine or clean water, or water provision at all. And I've thrown in at the bottom on its own line commerce, because that may not instinctively land with all of us, but in a recent study carried out, actually I think it was April 24, yeah, it's at the bottom there, by PwC, they calculated that 55% of global GDP is dependent on nature, which is a massive amount and a huge number, over 50 trillion pounds worth of dependency there. I would argue actually that it's all of our GDP and all of our commercial opportunity is dependent on nature and on the natural world, because if you don't have to travel very far down the supply chain of very many businesses to find a dependency on the natural world. Even if you just take humans as an example, we are completely dependent on nature, and we form the hub or the backbone of most businesses. So the challenge ahead of us is urgent. We are dependent on the success of that challenge, and so we need to fundamentally rethink how we do things. So going to talk specifically about natural processes. That is perhaps what I'm most passionate about. So rewilding or natural process restoration, and the context for that is that I used to work in pure conservation, which is to say engaged in the activity of trying to conserve or preserve something which I felt to be valuable, precious, or significant. That might be a landscape, a habitat, or maybe a species over time. And we as a nation have a long history within conventional conservation. So conventional conservation we kind of invented. You've got the RSPB in 1889 and the National Trust in 1895. So we're right at the forefront of conventional conservation, and yet we find ourselves right at the bottom of the league tables of nature intactness now. And so I'm going to come back round in a circle to recognizing the value of conservation at the end of this, because it is really valuable. But the first thing I want to do is to acknowledge that it as a standalone strategy hasn't worked. And what we really need now is to find opportunities to restore and regenerate and create, not just to preserve. So with a natural process restoration, we're outcome focused. What we're trying to do is to recognize that some of those habitats and species and some of that specialness is actually a result or an output of the natural processes, the complex interacting natural processes which present them. So perhaps an example might be in a non-conservation context, but it's relevant to the next part of the presentation, that we've got flood management. So for maybe 50 or 60 years, as a society, we have been treating the symptoms to our problems where floodwater is concerned, rather than the causes. So you have a flood event, and so the obvious solution is to dredge the watercourse, to expedite that water off of the land that you don't want to be flooded, rather than to understand why it's being flooded in the first place. And so the flooding takes place in the first place because there's a bit of climate change going on there, obviously, but mostly because we removed the capacity of our upper catchments. So land falls on a agricultural land holding, it skims straight off the surface. It's not been obstructed by much structural diversity because you've got monostructures and monocultures of agriculture. It slips straight into the well-maintained ditches, and it or gets caught by an underground land drain, and it's put straight into the river. So the river has to accept all of our water nearly all at once. And so you have these really high peak flow rates, and so you get flooding. And so there are other elements too, in that we've removed ephemeral features, we've removed ponds and scrapes in the name of productivity. And so the result is that you have this river that floods. And so the answer is to dredge that river, because that's to treat the symptom rather than the cause. And then the ultimate result that we're now finding really difficult to resolve is catastrophic downstream flooding again and again and again, because we've removed the upstream capacity. We've invested in the symptom, but not the problem, spending all your money on Nurofen to treat your headache, rather than ever asking why you're getting a headache in the first place. And so natural process restoration is really seeking to understand the engine that delivers those outcomes. And the kind of mechanism, or the site that I'm going to use to explain as a case study is our Watercress farm site. So I can see it's just over the top of my screens. It's just next to the Belmont estate, and it is a site that we acquired in 2019. We acquired it in 2019 very specifically because the Belmont estate is listed. So that's the 250 acres that I'm actually sitting in now whilst I'm looking at Watercress. I'm sitting on the Belmont estate, and that's a grade 2-star listed landscape, which is constrained in some respects by that listing. So if I really wanted this open-ended approach with no set outcomes and just really indulge in the processes, I would pretty soon butt up against that listing. So we purchased Watercress Farm in 2019 because we had this open-ended appetite. We acquired it because it was representative of a fairly typical is in speech marks there, because it's a risky thing to try and describe a typical UK farm. There are obviously many differences, and there is no such thing as average. But when you imagine an intensive commercial farming enterprise, I think we imagine huge, great big, multi-thousand acre farms, factory farming systems, massive machines, and the reality of the majority of our landscape, of our farmed landscape, is not that. The reality is that they're farms of 150 to 350 acres. They're family farms. They are reasonably dependent on the agri-environment, or actually more likely the area payment subsidy system, and they are not organic, and they have well-maintained hedges, and they have beautifully maintained ditches, and they often will have this livestock and arable rotation. And that is exactly what Watercress Farm was. So it's really powerful because it was representative of so many farms across the UK. And so it's an opportunity to demonstrate a different way to do things at a scale and in a context which is understandable and then repeatable by other people who perhaps are in the same boat. And another thing that was representative of this farm was that it had a very low ecological baseline. So on account of its clipped hedges, its non-organic system, of its well-maintained ditches, of its specialization in protein production. It was a bit of an ecological desert. It had another couple of things up its sleeve. So it's got a river running through the middle of it. So some key ingredients to nature recovery, which give us those ingredients for that recipe of nature recovery. If you've got a waterway, or you've got, as we do, a little remnant of semi-natural ancient woodland or ribbons of hedgerows, then they're a really good starting place for recovery. And I said earlier I'd come back round in a circle and make sure that I'm not being too mean to conventional conservation, because it really does matter, and it really will matter. If, like I do, you have this mission of restoration, and especially natural process, so nature-driven restoration, then if you haven't got islands of communities or populations to refill these new processes that you're creating, because perhaps they haven't been conserved by someone working hard to make sure that population still exists, then either it won't work, or it'll take a much longer time to achieve. And as we've already touched on, time is of the essence. And so it's quite a small site. It's about 130 acres, but what it lacks in scale, it makes up for in its representativeness, and it makes up for on its proximity to Bristol. So it's maybe 10 minutes outside of Bristol, and it's a fantastic platform to try and inspire from. So the reason that we've been able to get so many children through this site is because of its proximity to Bristol. The reason that we're able to take so many people on so many project walks and start to sort of spread the word is because it's really well located. So it's a powerful tool in this sort of arsenal of inspiring people. And we had this desire to rewild and rewet this landscape. So it had been simplified. It had much of the complexity had been lost, and it was our desire to put that back. So the way we've done that, not hugely different to how anyone else does it. So we immediately registered as organic. That patchwork of structural vegetation diversity, or that patchwork of species diversity that was missing, that once existed before, at least in part because of the impacts of a guild of herbivores that we don't have access to anymore. So I'm thinking of aurochs and tarpan and wild boar. And in our particular situation, we definitely don't have auroch and tarpan, and we don't have a local wild boar population. So we put in proxies for those species, as you will have seen in other projects. So we've got free-ranging, free-roaming herbivores and omnivores, all creating disturbance and delivering various impacts in this landscape. So for wild boar, we've got Tamworth pigs, we've got our own Devon cattle for auroch, and we've got we borrowed from the RSPB Dartmoor ponies for the role of the tarpan. And that in itself, if you just think about the difference between the dairy farm example that I started with and this one example, there is that multiplication of differences just by having three different herbivores or omnivores on the same site, each with different stomachs and guts, each with different coats, different hoof patterns, each with different mouth parts and grazing patterns. And so the multiplication of their differences gives you this exponential growth in difference and diversity and complexity just within one move. But that's not all. We also we're going to let the hedges billow out. We're kind of kickstarting natural tree regeneration, where we have to, with a bit of either seed source planting or scrub pile creation, so that we can create creches for natural regeneration, and trees being protected from the attentions of grazing animals. And then we're going to look at water. We have looked at water, so we've blocked our ditches, and we've looked to try and recreate a functioning, sustainable kind of a wetland system across this site, which I'll tell you about next. So I'm going to try and share a video in a minute with my own particular technical prowess. I wouldn't promise that it won't go slightly wrong at some stage, but if it does go wrong, or if it doesn't buffer well, then I know that we'll be able to share it with you afterwards, and so don't worry too much. And then my last apologies is for the act of profound arrogance in you guys enduring a whole webinar with me talking at you, and then in the middle of it, me including a video of me. So apologies for that. I'm going to see if I can get it to play, so bear with. So I'm hoping that most of you could hear that. Some of you will have spotted the partner organisation that we delivered the big chunk of that rewetting project with, which was Ecosudis. I'll talk a bit about partnerships and how brilliantly that went later on in the presentation. So ultimately, that work's been going for 2 or 3 years now. And we got these range of ambitions for impact, and it's fair to say that the project has delivered impacts over and above just biodiversity, which is nature health, which is done pretty well. But and I'll touch on those. But amongst the other impacts it's delivered are those community impacts. So we're delivering volunteering opportunities not only for our core group of volunteers, but also for our corporate partners that help us fund what we're doing. It's, as I said, the home for the nature connection and nature education piece. It's delivering climate benefits and benefits or impacts to treat some of the ramifications of climate change. So by creating floodwater capacity and by slowing the flow, we're delivering downstream flood mitigation benefits. We're improving air quality. We're sequestering carbon through the development of deeper rooted herbage and natural regeneration and scrub encroachment. And it's been a really useful platform for research, for academia. So quite a few of the local universities have been inspired by the project, but also really enjoying the fact that they get to get involved from stage one. So rather than go and see something which is already wonderful, they're getting to monitor, research and record and be involved in something from step one all the way through. But perhaps most importantly is that it gives us a almost constant supply of good news stories. So those good news stories make you feel good, they make you happy, they're good for getting content out there and achieving sort of marketing gains. But the reality of all human transactions and interactions is that we've always lived our life with stories, and even now in this time of offsetting and unitization, the stories matter as much as they ever did to get buy-in, to get inspire either change or support. The stories really matter. And so from the return of green woodpeckers immediately exploding in numbers because they're feeding on the return of ant populations, which themselves have bounced back because we're no longer cutting or flailing or rolling or harrowing a landscape, to the arrival of a new species because of the, let's say, snipe, which we haven't recorded on site because we've built this new wetland feature. The good news stories just keep coming, which is really useful. So I'm going to start with wildlife and biodiversity. I'm sure that nearly all of us here understand that biodiversity isn't the sole indicator of ecosystem health. It may not even be the best indicator of ecosystem health, but it's useful. But ultimately, we've taken a really broad baseline, and we're gathering data on an ongoing basis, which traverses species and habitat and other kind of ecosystem elements like soil health and water quality. And we now find ourselves in the position where we're starting to get multiple years of data. So we can do the important bit, which is to start to interpret trends or to understand more clearly some of the interactions and some of the intactness in there, which might be about the intactness of communities, or it might be about trophic intactness or any ecological mechanism within an ecosystem. But to look specifically at some of the species data that we've got in front of us, the next slide, I'll go into a bit of detail about how we've gathered this information. And what we have is an army of data gatherers. And so what we have got is some quite high numbers. So in total, we've recorded so far over 1,600 different species on this site. And that's not because it's an oasis of biodiversity. It's because it's probably one of the most recorded sites in Somerset. However, as that number is rising, and that number is rising because of our interventions, and it's those trends that I find really fascinating, that are really important. But to take this slide at face value, there's been some really interesting information gathered. So 86 different types of bird, 280 different types of plant and fungus, and then we've got 14 different types of bat, which is getting close to the full suite. And we've broken the invertebrates up into two sections. So we've got 738 invertebrates, excluding butterflies, moths, and dragonflies or odonata, and then we've got 471 recorded species of butterflies, moths, and odonata. So some really interesting figures, but the next part is the interesting part over the next few years, when we can start to spot those trends and start to really understand the power of our management. The reason we've got such a hugely broad baseline of information is because we have got this vibrant community of volunteers working with us and for us, and we're hugely lucky. And to just declare really early on that's not really because of me. There's a bit of a almost an accident, really. So when we first started the project, I really didn't want to put lots of signs up, and I really wanted people to buy into the project, and I really wanted kind of local engagement. And so every project has the same conundrums. We've got ground nesting birds. Do we put up a load of signs that say, please keep your dogs on a lead, and don't do this and don't do that? And I absolutely didn't want to do that. And at the same time, wanted a bit of community engagement to make sure that we had local people bought into what was happening. So we thought, okay, I'll start a little volunteering group, and maybe that'll help me, because the volunteers themselves will understand to keep their own dogs on a lead, and maybe they'll even lead other people's behaviours. And the first few volunteers that we got were industry experts in their field. So out of the woodwork came this latent expertise. So one of the volunteers is the head of entomology at the Natural History Museum. We've got moth and butterfly experts. We've got botanists now, and we've got ornithologists. And so there's this sort of groundswell of support from genuine experts from the local community, wanting to be part of something which felt impactful, which allowed people to take action or be part of something taking action, but most of all felt hopeful. We find ourselves confronted with the dire reality of our situation all day, every day, and that's not hugely inspiring. It's probably more terrifying than inspiring. I think the most galvanizing thing we can do is provide opportunities for action and for hope, and this project seems to have done that. So we got this wave of expertise offering their time for free, which was wonderful. And then the next wave of people offering their time were kind of early entrant ecologists, and looking to learn from the site, but also learn from those expert volunteers that we were so lucky to have access to. And then there's those keen, enthusiastic amateurs. And so now we've got getting on for 250 registered and engaged volunteers, and we've really focused them on our ecological recording. We did that for a couple of reasons. One, it's a big job that we need to do. Any site needs to understand the trajectory of its impact, so you can't manage what you can't understand. And this, second of all, we'll talk a bit in a sec about financing, and ultimately what financing comes down to in this new emerging kind of field of natural capital is you finance the uplift from A to B in a site or a project. And so if you can't quantify A and you can't quantify B, then it's very difficult to capitalize on those emerging markets. So really important. And perhaps the third reason was because actually lots of volunteers desperate to get involved in some way in what we're doing, and in a project like ours, there aren't as many ways to pick up a shovel as you might want there to be, and there's probably slightly more keenness to get involved than I've got opportunities. So steering us towards that ecological recording bit seemed to work really well, and we applied rigor and structure so that we could have real quality in our data and we still do, by using a consultancy, an environmental consultancy. They don't gather the information, but they structure how it's recorded, so that it's repeatable, and it's high quality, and it's usable going forward. And then just a little bit of detail on the nature-based education. So like I say, it's not really education at all. It's about the invaluable opportunity for children and naturally just everyone to reconnect with the natural world. When I think about my education at school, if I wasn't playing, we didn't leave the classroom unless we were playing sport or you were sent out, both of which happened with some regularity in my case. But so we designed really early on this curriculum linked, structured education experience in our rewilding project in the centre, and then immediately realised it wasn't what was required. So what was required was almost the antidote to the curriculum. Children especially are innately able to connect with the natural world, to explore it, to be emotionally or intellectually or physically or maybe even spiritually restored by it. And so what we really needed to do was to give children opportunity and get out of the way. We keep everyone safe, but if they want to get in the stream and play in the stream, climb trees, that's exactly what they do. And it's been an utterly inspirational experience. So it's not just schools, we do preschools, we do every school age, and we do some post-school stuff. And then we do charities and groups that require a special type of experience. And some of the transformations between a busload of children traveling to site in complete silence to a busload of children leaving site in a riot of chaos and enthusiasm and laughter, it's been really special. So we're very proud of it. It's been pretty impactful so far, with getting on for 4,500 visits so far. Tremendous ambition to scale that. So we've learned a load of stuff along the way, and I'm going to whiz through this bit because I don't want to take away all the time for questions at the end, especially given that I cost us a bit of time at the beginning with my technical ineptitude. But we learned some key things along the way. So the importance of baselining is completely fundamental. If I had a piece of advice for any land manager, it would be do as much baselining and consider your baselining as much as you possibly can, because you can't manage what you can't measure, and because the next slide is about finance and it's about money, and you can't finance this in this new and exciting market which is coming down the line unless you can quantify it. So hugely important, and somehow contriving a baselining model for a market which you don't yet truly understand or hasn't yet come to fruition is easier said than done, but that is the challenge. In our rewetting project specifically, which EcoSud has helped us with, there were inevitable planning challenges. Actually, challenges are the wrong words, really. The planners were great. It just took a long time. Not much resistance, just not much experience in dealing with a project of this scale. We moved 100,000 tons of spoil and created ponds, scrapes, rivers in almost every field enclosure on the site. And so put that in front of your local planning authority and it raised a few eyebrows. But building in enough time for that planning process was pretty important. And then it cost a load of money to do this, and it potentially would have cost more if we weren't able to, with a set of really key partnerships, value engineer. I'm trying to think of a different word because perhaps it's not as descriptive as it should be, but at every stage of the process there is an opportunity to do things in a creative way to keep the money in your pocket. So I looked really carefully at everything from employing our own people on a short-term basis to drive the dumpers that were going to move the spoil, because a lot of costs live there, or to what we might do for design to keep cost at a certain level, or what materials, are you buying materials in, or can you win them on site? So can you win the gravel to line your stream on site, X, Y, and Z? And the extrapolation of that cost engineering keeps your project the right side of deliverable. And the alternative is that if you're not immersed in the center of your project, keeping an eye on all of those details, then you can find the cost gets to the point where I guess the most simple way to put it is you can do less. It can have less impact because it's cost more money per impact. And I'm to just jump to the bottom one. Partners are so important there. So EcoSulis were absolutely wonderful in that respect. Work with Nick May on a daily basis, trying to challenge and trying to evolve or be creative about how we did everything. Because the more money I could keep in our pocket, the more I could respend it, extending our ambition. It could be an extra scrape or an extra pond. And so that was a wonderful experience. If I stick on partners and EcoSulis, I couldn't recommend them enough. Really professional, live in the same space as us, so understand the ambition for process creation, and I could heartily recommend them. There were some other key partnerships as well. So if I'm going to get something through an LPA, a local planning authority, that doesn't necessarily understand this scale of project, then partnering with some of the key organisations like the Environment Agency was really important, and they were great right from the outset. But when it was just still a sketch on the back of a fag packet, the Environment Agency were involved, and we were kind of stoking each other's enthusiasm and ambition all the way through. So that was great. And then just before I leave the slide, the unforeseen. It goes without saying, there's always unforeseen in any project, and the unforeseen we're dealing with at the moment is a bit of repair and adjustment as the exceptional rainwater or water levels that we had over the winter has eroded some of the features that we thought might last longer. So we're just coming round and attending to those this spring. So the last 5 minutes, I'll just talk about money, or I'll be less than 5 minutes. So money really matters. I'm not really in this for money. I'm sure many of us aren't. We're in it because nature is intrinsically important, and it's intrinsically more important than money. However, going back to those earlier slides, we can't let nature disappear on our watch for loads of really selfish reasons. And so if we're going to fund the sort of recovery in the sort of time that we need it, we have to make it commercially exciting enough for lots of people to want to do it. And so we're in the very privileged position that we can spend some money kind of at risk at this point in time before we've really defined the revenue opportunities. And we do that because there's a real life farmer next door who can't take that risk. And so he may well and does want to be involved, but he can't take the risk. He's got a mortgage to pay and kids to feed and bills that would mount up if he didn't have a really clear route to market and a really clear return on investment. And so the value that we can offer here is we can break open some new ground and find some new pathways and demonstrate a financially viable, financially exciting model that lots of other people can then grab onto. And so that's a key part of our mission. So that's in order to develop that traction and momentum, you have to create and demonstrate something which is commercially exciting. If it's just commercially on a par with what everyone is getting at the moment, then it'll be difficult to imagine why they would jump ship. So there's a load of emerging natural capital opportunities, which I'll just touch on very briefly. This slide has no place here, really, because the title is covered in the next slide, but I included it just because it's a brilliant picture of an area of our rewilding project. So in a snapshot, you get structural diversity. You've got a dozen different habitats in the same place, all interacting, all bumping into each other, and a picture of that site in a few years' time would look completely different. It's got true dynamism. I really like it. So natural capital opportunities, we will have all heard lots and lots about it. Some of us are involved in these markets, and ultimately some of them will be right for a project. Some of them won't be right for a project because of either geographical location, various site conditions, various other constraints or opportunities, or the fact that the market's not fully emerged yet. But they might range from carbon to phosphates and nutrients, that's nutrient balancing for development mostly, to biodiversity net gain, which is a hugely powerful bit of legislation and policy that seeks to put nature at the heart of planning. I think it's got a long way to go to be perfect, and we'll see how it goes in its rollout. But its power lies in the fact that it, even though it's not perfect, our government has launched it, and we're going to make it work. And that's the sort of boldness and ambition and willingness to iterate to perfect that I think is the sort of approach that we need now. And then there's this emerging voluntary nature credit market. There are wider ecosystem service payments for every ecosystem service that your landscape can deliver, whether it's water storage, whether it's access or community, whether it's carbon storage. There is an emerging market for all of it. And ultimately, people are paying for the uplift or the impact, and finding ways to quantify it so that you can then find a market for it is the name of the game. And so we're building those markets, we're developing those markets, and then we'll share our learnings so that other people can do it without needing to absorb the sort of risk that we're absorbing. I'll shut up really soon so as we can get to some of those in the questions. So what's next for Belmont? That was the last slide. Next for Belmont is to scale our ambition. So if you run a business which is built on values that you really hold dear, then your ultimate ambition is to scale that as much as you can. So we'll define that market, we'll generate that commercial revenue, and then we'll scale our ambition. At the same time, we hope to be facilitating mass uptake so that everyone can join the journey. So thanks so much for your time. I'm sorry about the initial technical difficulties, and I'm sorry about the Gill ramble followed by a Gill video followed up by another Gill ramble, but thank you so much for enduring it. I'll stop sharing and hand back over to Kate.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such a fantastic and insightful and thought-provoking presentation as well, Gil. It really, really was. And going back to a really early kind of comment you made at the start, I definitely completely agree with you in that I do think that all our GDP is absolutely reliant on nature. I think, we are intrinsically linked, and I think we have to constantly keep that at the forefront of our minds. I think we're making big decisions too, and we just absolutely love the work that you do with and the opportunities you provide for children, certainly around the Bristol area, just to connect with nature. It really is amazing to see, and if you have had the opportunity to go to the site, it really will kind of blow your mind when you do see the opportunity in the setup there. It is just fantastic. It really, really is. We have had quite a lot of questions. I've tried to track as many as possible. If we don't get time, because we've just got kind of 5 minutes left, we will kind of come back to you and send some responses in emails as well. So just having a first look, I'm just having to scroll back. Bear with me 2 seconds. So the first question was from Mauricio, and he's asked, should carbon sequestration be one of the priority natural processes we need to include in the conversation?
So my own point of view, and this is only my own point of view, is that the beauty of restoring complex natural processes is that you get some of those outputs by accident. So we're not a B&G project over there, and yet we produce a hell of a lot of B&G units, which will help fund us. But we haven't developed a site for B&G, nor would I develop a site for carbon personally. But it doesn't mean I don't want to quantify all of the carbon sequestration that happens by virtue of those wonderful, complex, functioning, self-sustaining natural processes. And there will be some, and quite a lot, depending on what you're planning to do. But my instinct is that when you really overly focus on one particular output, then you kind of miss the need for complexity. So if we just took tree planting for carbon sequestration as an example, there are loads of problems coming down the line with monoculture tree planting for carbon sequestration, because it's missing the complexity that nature just has innately, and it's easily quantified on the spreadsheet, but it misses the mark by some way. So I wouldn't prioritize a specific output other than probably complexity.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more, Gil. Thank you. Second question was more for some advice, and this might be maybe better in a follow-up, but I'll just kind of put it to you anyway. This is from Toby. He said, please could you share some advice for early careers people on how to get into the industry of rewilding and restoration?
It's been such a long time since I got into it myself. I'll tell you how I did get into it. I lived on a street and climbed over fences to get my nature connection. I didn't really have a really profound connection with nature. I just sought it out as a young person, and I climbed into my local airport of all places. I climbed over the big security fence and turned over tins and looked for things. And I know that I haven't got time for this story, but I was taking a fungi specialist from Natural England around the sites last year, and I told him that story, and he said, yeah, it's so similar for me. And then he described it, and then we realized we lived 2 streets away from each other, and we climbed over the same fence, and we actually went to the same school. Anyway, the answer, I think, for me was to find opportunities to get involved in any way possible. So not everyone wanted to pay me initially, and so I just went and hung around and got involved in places that I was passionate about, built some relationships, got my hands dirty, and out of every relationship comes some opportunity. And so just finding a place to start, that's how I approached it.
Absolutely. I think there's lots of different routes, aren't there, into this environment. I think you can come from all different walks of life and kind of different sectors and backgrounds too. I think if you've got that passion for nature and got that passion for restoration, I think there's definitely a place for you, isn't there? That's definitely what we see.
Yeah.
I've got another careers-based question here from Carol, and she'd like to know more about careers in general and what careers in general are in high demand in rewilding, both currently and in the future?
So there's a huge explosion of demand for ecologists. Ecologists have been built into all of the planning processes through B&G, and they are increasingly important in terms of understanding uplift, whatever that uplift may be in, so that you can define a natural capital product. And then there's this new market in natural capital itself, and so that's the kind of end of the process where you try and quantify and productize the thing. I've slightly pulled a face there because I don't truly believe in quantifying and productizing nature. I do truly believe in the need to do it right now to catalyze traction. But I do recognise that it's beyond quantification. But and so then the other end is so defining those products, making them, finding a route to market, that kind of marketing end. And then in the middle, the delivery is there are actually relatively few, growing all the time, but relatively few practitioners who really understand natural process, who really understand and are capable of resisting the urge to focus on an outcome and to let nature be in charge and to be chuffed with what you're given rather than dictate an outcome. And so there's a real opportunity because the world is changing really quickly. There is loads of space for new practitioners. There's probably a shortage, I would say.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gil. We are on time. I'm going to try and squeeze just one more in because we've got quite a few. Last one from James is, how long did Gil allow the land to recover before the proxy herbivores were introduced? And were all the herbivores introduced at the same time?
That's a good question. And I wouldn't like to make it sound like there was more strategy here than there was. So the site is in two halves, and one half has had no herbivores on at all by way of a control measure to see what happens, which is to say quite a lot of natural regeneration. And the other half had its herbivores put in at the start, and they were put in stages, but those stages were based on when I could get hold of them rather than anything more strategic than that. And so you've got this two halves of the site, one with more natural regen and the other half with more invertebrate abundance. And so there's something to learn there, and we're just kind of working through understanding and defining an approach based on those two bits of learning. But I didn't want that to stop me. So as soon as we got the site, we registered as organic and we put our herbivores straight into one side, and they are delivering change immediately. It's just a slightly different change to that which was being delivered on the non-herbivore site. And so we'll work through that data, and I might end up with an opinion, but I doubt I will, to be honest. I'll end up with an understanding that that both of them have their merits, and just getting on and doing something is about the most powerful thing you can do. If you can start today, because we're running out of days to start.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gil. Unfortunately, that is just over time, so we'll have to end questions now. Thank you all so much for the questions you sent over. For those that we didn't get time to answer, I will pull them all through and we'll try and get response across to you by the end of the week, maybe early next week. Just to reiterate, we have recorded the session today and we will send it across to you all. But if you do have any additional questions, you think of anything else after the event, please drop us an email we've provided and we can answer them for you, or we'll get them across to Gil and he'll answer them for you as soon as he can. Thank you all so much, and thank you again to you, Gil. It's been a great opportunity to hear more about the work that you do and the Belmont estate. And yeah, hopefully look forward to seeing you all at the next partner webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.